Hey everyone, it's Sevi. If you've pulled Clara and her Jaeger slash Big Daddy slash Robot Berserker Svarog and want to know how to utilize her unique playstyle, you've come to the right place. Clara's a somewhat trickier unit who's also easy to underrate because of her unique counterattack focused kit. Without the right setup and understanding of her kit, that can fail to properly unlock her high combat potential. This guide will go through Clara's kit, Eidolons, best Relic and Light Cone builds, and team synergies to help you better understand what she has to offer. Let's get into it.
Hello, I'm Clara. Wanna be in my family, like Mr. Svarog?
Clara's true strength lies in exploiting her counterattack playstyle, which starts with her talent. Clara gets a default 10% damage reduction from enemy attacks, which is only the beginning of her amazing tankiness. Then when Clara gets hit by an enemy, Svarog puts a mark of counter on that enemy and he retaliates with a counter attack. Note that this counter attack is considered a follow-up attack, so related effects or blessings can also affect it. From this, you can see Clara wants to get hit as much as possible so that Svarog can counter. Her talent's counter attacks also have no limit or cooldown, so technically she can keep countering as long as the enemy hits keep coming and she sustains her health. This is a major damage source and there are means of manipulating aggro to further exploit this mechanic, which will be important to maximize her. Now with Clara's skill, Svarog launches an attack that hits all enemies. If it hits an enemy with the mark of counter, then it deals additional damage. So ideally, Clara will already have countered that enemy prior to using her skill. This mark will disappear if the skill procs it, so you need to counter the enemy again to reapply it. Now you might think having Clara get hit is reliant on RNG, and if that doesn't happen, then she doesn't really do as much counterattack damage, which isn't wrong. Thankfully, Clara does have innate means and team synergies that make her much more likely to get targeted by enemies. The most significant method is via her ultimate. Casting it gives Clara these buffs for 2 turns. 1, it makes Clara get a further damage reduction bonus, making her tankier. 2, it further increases her likelihood of getting attacked, which in practice is quite reliable. And 3, it buffs Svarog's counters to become enhanced counter attacks. Enhanced counters deal much more damage and also deal splash damage. This makes Clara very deadly in AoE scenarios. Furthermore, these enhanced counters can actually proc if an ally is hit, not just Clara herself. This is a fallback guarantee that Clara will counter if ever she fails to aggro the enemy to her. There is a limit to enhanced counters, which is 2 times or until the ultimate buff expires, but oftentimes you should proc both instances before her ultimate can expire. And even if the enhanced counters are spent, Clara still gets the damage reduction and aggro effects until the ultimate buff expires or gets refreshed. Maintaining her ultimate state will be important to help her deal more counterattack damage and survive the incoming barrage she's inviting. That does mean she needs to get her energy back consistently, but thankfully, recharging her energy is incredibly easy because of her aggro and counterattack mechanics. When enemies hit her, she gets energy back, and when she hits back with a counterattack, she also gets energy. This loop feeds into her energy cost really well, and by the time you want to refresh her ultimate, it's most likely your ultimate is ready again, or very close to being ready, especially if you're in multi-enemy scenarios. Additionally, if you use her technique to initiate a battle, she immediately increases the chances of being targeted, and as a destruction character, she has a higher than usual taunt value to help aggro enemy hits by default. Going to her bonus abilities, each one adds something valuable to her kit. The Ascension 2 ability lets her have a 35% chance to remove a debuff when she's attacked. This helps nicely with her survivability and reduces the necessity of having someone else remove the debuff on her. The Ascension 4 ability gives additional resistance to crowd control debuffs like freeze, which again also helps her survive and prevent disruptions to her counterattacks. And the Ascension 6 ability increases Svarog's counter by 30%, which is a huge damage increase. All these are very helpful for making her more tanky and deadly. I do think there are a couple of caveats or less than ideal scenarios with her playstyle though. For one, she's best used in multi-target scenarios to maximize her AoE potential, and more enemy attacks to her means a higher damage ceiling. In single target scenarios, Clara can still perform well, though her damage potential won't be as fully unlocked. Another very important thing is having a team that complements her playstyle, as anti-synergistic teammates can compromise her damage potential. I'll discuss more of this in the team section. As for her traces leveling up priority, her talent, skill, and ultimate all add up as valuable damage sources, but in the meantime, my recommended order would be her ultimate, followed by her talent, then her skill. Her basic attacks will be the lowest priority, and you can spend your resources on more important things instead. Unlock her Ascension abilities as they come along if you have the resources, but the Ascension 6 ability will be the best among them. Her minor traces are nice stat boosts to unlock as well if you have the materials to spare. Clara's very formidable at E0 already, but let's just take a look at what her Eidolons add. E1 makes it so that her skill will no longer remove the marks of counter. As long as you've marked the enemy, it's already a permanent damage bonus to her skill. E2 increases her attack for 2 turns after using her ultimate. This is a straightforward damage increase for all forms of counter and abilities. If played optimally, her ultimate is consistently refreshed, thus making this attack buff just as consistent. E3 increases her skill and basic attack levels. E4 gives her a huge 30% damage reduction bonus after she gets hit, which lasts until her next turn. This boosts her survivability so much more and is quite valuable against multiple enemies. E5 increases her talent and ultimate level, making this more valuable than her E3. And finally, for E6, Svarog gets a default 50% fixed chance to now counter and mark an enemy when an ally gets hit, even if Clara's ultimate is not active. This massively mitigates the RNG aspect of Clara's counter attacks, which allows for more leeway and team flexibility since it's less necessary to want Clara to aggro enemies. More so, her enhanced counter proc limit is increased to 3, which is ultimately more AoE damage potential. Now let's go through Clara's relic builds. What stats and sets are preferable? The stats are pretty much straightforward. For the body piece, you want crit rate to help achieve the baseline 50% crit rate, which also activates her best planar ornament set effect. If you don't have a crit rate piece yet, attack will temporarily do. For the feat piece, I recommend an attack percent main stat to boost her damage in all attack sources except break effects. You might wonder why not a speed feat piece, so let's quickly discuss it. I think that Clara doesn't need a high speed stat because she's mainly a counter-attacking unit. In fact, she currently has the lowest speed base stat. The majority of her damage output and means of regenerating energy is mainly through counter-attacking, which doesn't really rely on having fast turn rates. If played ideally, Clara should have enough or almost full energy to refresh her ultimate when it'll expire, almost entirely via counter-attacks. Essentially, having attack that makes her hit overall harder and maximizes her counter-attack damage is more beneficial than faster speed. Then for the planar sphere, get physical damage bonus, but if you don't have one yet, attack will do fine in the meantime. For the link rope, she also prefers attack percent. Energy regen rate is not necessary since Clara's default energy generation is already enough. Special considerations can be given to pieces that have defense or HP as a main stat, but with extremely good substats to be an alternative to the attack piece. Trading attack for either defense or HP will result in reducing her damage output at the cost of better tanking. But if the pieces have really good substats, then that can help compensate for the potential damage loss from the main stat change. Of course, having the attack main stat and offensive substats for a piece is the best route for maximizing damage. You could just alternate pieces depending on the scenario. For the substats, crit and attack stats will be the most preferable to boost her raw damage. Defense or HP are not that bad since they still help Clara tank more hits, but won't help with damage. Break effect is not entirely useless, but is less preferable than crit or attack stats. If you're not sure how break effect works, check out my previous guide video linked in the description. For her best in slot full set, it's the 4-piece Champion of Streetwise boxing set. The 2-piece effect increases physical damage bonus, and the 4-piece effect stacks attack on the user when they hit or get hit, which either way happens to Clara, well, pretty often. It's basically perfect for her. You can also purchase a full set at the Bellabog shop, so if they have good stats, that can stay on Clara for a good while. If you don't have a good 4-piece set, you can stick to 2-piece combos of the Champion set, the Musketeer set which boosts attack, or the Guard of Wuthering Snow which reduces damage taken, mixed between these 2-piece combos that have the best main and substats. As for the planar ornament, the Inert Salsoto is the preferred set. It gives 8% crit rate, and if the user reaches at least 50% crit rate, then they get a 15% damage increase to the ultimate and follow-up attacks. Note that Clara's ultimate cast itself does not do any damage because the enhanced counters are still considered follow-up attacks, but the set buffs those anyway, so it all works out. Now let's check out her light cone options. Clara's best in slot is her signature 5-star light cone, Something Irreplaceable. It's got the highest base stats with her attack and damage bonus buffs. It also heals the user if they defeat an enemy or is attacked, and the heal scales on the user's attack stat. This allows Clara to much more easily sustain herself. No surprise why this is busted for her. The other 5-star light cone option is actually obtainable just by playing Simulated Universe. This is the On the Fall of an Aeon light cone from Herta's store. It's got high base stats, an attack stacking buff, and damage bonus buff when the user does a weakness break. Svarog's counter attacks also count towards proccing the attack buff, which makes it easy to stack. Though the break requirement for the damage bonus makes its full potential depend on that condition, which you ideally want to activate alongside the attack buff. Overall, it's a great free destruction light cone for Clara that you can superimpose over time, giving it amazing value. What might prevent you from getting this is if you prioritize the other light cones in the Herta store first, in which case you'll have to wait a while to get another 5-star light cone. If so, Clara has good 4-star alternatives as well. Let's go through them. Nowhere to Run is the Battle Pass locked destruction light cone. It has great base stats and its effect gives an unconditional attack boost plus a self-healing mechanic by defeating enemies, which provides added comfort. It's an okay stat stick that provides situational sustain. However, I wouldn't recommend selecting it as your Battle Pass light cone, especially not just for Clara. A Secret Vow gives a damage bonus increase to the user and a further increase if the user attacks an enemy with a higher HP percent. But if Clara is well protected, she may not get the latter bonus as much. Still, the unconditional damage bonus is great, and activating both bonuses can make her hit really hard, especially at high superimpositions. It's a very solid 4-star option, and the value of its buff can further increase depending on Clara's own stats and other buffs she receives. Under the Blue Sky gives an attack buff, and if the user defeats an enemy, they get a crit rate buff for 3 turns. Against smaller enemy types, the crit buff will be easy to proc, though in boss fights it'll be more situational. Lastly, the Moles Welcome You is one more option. It requires the user to attack with their basic attack, skill, and ultimate to get the separate attack buffs. However, Clara will not be able to get the maximum stacks since her ultimate is not considered an attack. If Clara wants to maximize her potential in your team, you need teammates that will synergize with her counter-attack playstyle. Consider if this team helps Clara aggro enemies and maximize getting hit, and if it helps Clara survive comfortably enough. These factors, aside from the usual consideration of covering enemy weaknesses, can determine how much synergy or anti-synergy the team possesses with Clara. Let's address survivability needs first with Preservation and Abundance characters. March 7th is one such unit with amazing synergy for Clara. I mentioned this in my previous March 7th guide, which you can check out too in the description. Because March 7th's shield increases its target's aggro, that stacks with Clara's own taunt increase. But when shielded allies get hit, March also counterattacks. Having these characters make up a sort of counterattack team. March's shield also cleanses debuffs, which further helps Clara's survival. One thing to note about is that March does have a chance to freeze enemies with her ultimate. Frozen enemies have to thaw first, which delays their turn or attack, thereby reducing the opportunity to hit Clara and be counterattacked. This doesn't necessarily mean you should never use March's ultimate, especially if it'll help break toughness, but it is a trade-off to consider if March freezes enemies. For our 2 other preservation characters, Japard and Fire Trailblazer, you may notice that they have some anti-synergy with Clara, since they also have innate taunt increases in their kit. Japard is no doubt an incredible defensive option. However, his bonus ability gives him a higher chance of getting hit, more so if you equip one of the light cones that increases aggro. This makes Japard and Clara compete for the enemy's attention. Clara should get her ultimate up consistently, which at least helps mitigate this anti-synergy. However, Clara's enhanced counters have a 2-proc limit, so it's possible to lose counterattack opportunities if that's exceeded and if the enemies attack Japard instead. Fire MC also has the same issue with Clara, since their skill is made to specifically taunt enemies. The shield they give to your team is also quite thin, so it's not a reliable way to ensure Clara's protection, especially if the enemies have strong AoE attacks. As for Abundance characters, you have really good options between Natasha or Bailu. Bailu will have more comfortable healing. Her Invigoration buff heals the character when they get hit, which works well with Clara who wants to get hit, and it also gives a damage reduction buff from unlocking her A6 ability. Bailu's A2 can also increase Clara's HP by overhealing her, and if Clara dies, Bailu's revive is a great safety net to keep the fight going. Natasha is also still very reliable at healing Clara, and one key advantage Natasha has is her skill's debuff cleansing, which helps get rid of pesky or dangerous debuffs on teammates. Since both of them are physical, that can be a good combo against physical weak enemies. If you want high comfort, then it's certainly possible to combine multiple survival supports, like putting Natasha and March in the same team, which also happens to be quite free-to-play friendly. As long as you've got your survival needs covered, then the flex slots will depend on your preferences or the needs of the battle. Clara is a great way to keep the heat off other damage dealers and squishy units. Units like Yanqing with his Soul Sink buff appreciate this, and units like Dan Heng or Su Shang reduce their own aggro, directing more of the heat towards Clara. Though it's possible that putting her in a team that's designed to really kill the enemies quickly, like Zila, and her fast-killing playstyle and turn-refreshing mechanics, will minimize the damage output Clara provides. After all, if the enemy enemies are dead too soon, they can't hit Clara anymore. You can also match her with Harmony units to buff her and your teammates like Asta or Tingyun, or Nihility to debuff the enemies like Pella, who can shred through the entire enemy team's defense to amplify Clara's damage. Note though that slowing effects, particularly that of Welts, can also potentially reduce Clara's damage output. If the enemies are too slow, then that reduces the opportunities to hit Clara as well. One more tip is about team arrangement. Since Clara will be aggroing enemy hits a lot, it's best to place her at the edge of the team and place her beside a unit who can also take a lot of damage like your healer or March. This helps minimize collateral damage from the enemy's AoE attacks which target Clara. Ultimately, if utilized properly and with the right team, Clara's playstyle can yield a high damage ceiling, especially for AoE scenarios while serving as your team's tank as well. But above all, her most broken ability is how she can even walk barefoot on any environment without pain or complaint. If that doesn't convince you how good she is, I don't know what will. No, but seriously, please, Hoyo, give Clara some shoes. Even flip-flops will do. And that's going to be it for this Clara guide. Let me know if you're a Clara wanter and what you think about her, or if you have her, how your experience has been with her so far. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!
I'm getting sleepy. Time for a nap on Mr. Svarog's arm. Are you coming?